Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company, and today we are discussing what might be the most misunderstood and distinctive de Bethune product family ever made. I call them the middle de Bethunes in the same sense that some of the Mesoamerican influenced middle Frank Lloyd Wright buildings were distinct from what came prior, but also what came after. The early DB20 series watches, which are shingle-like in form and very different from the classicism of the early years or the extravagant avant-garde of the later de Bethune timepieces. So we're going to talk about the DB22s and the 24s today, and also highlight what makes them different and interesting in a way that might be provocative to collectors who are less familiar with these. So if you think of Frank Lloyd Wright's Hollyhock House built out west, you realize that he adopted mid-career these Mesoamerican revival themes, very different from what he practiced early on and very different from his later life buildings. Well, Denis Flageolet of de Bethune started out with very classical designs. If you're familiar with the DB1 series, and the cases inherited from the DB1 down the line up to the DB20s, this is what the original de Bethune watches looked like. This is a DB8. So the DB8 is very similar to the DB1, the first product from 2002, except this came a year later, and it's a little bit more modern. Still round case, fixed lug, 42 millimeters in diameter, but you have leaf hands instead of breguet. You have Arabic numerals instead of Roman. You've got this rosette cut at the center dial, and then a single register rather than a twin register layout, but the single register is for 45 minutes rather than 30. So this is where de Bethune design started, very reverential, I would say, of historical watchmakers along the lines of Breguet and classical dress watches such as mid-century Vacheron, Patek, and Audemars. A fascinating watch on a lot of levels. It gave way in 2005 to something that would become sort of emblematic of where de Bethune would eventually go. So the 2005 DBS, which you see right here, still has some of the outward form of the DB1 case, and you can see that in the conventional lugs at the base of the watch. But when you go up here, you realize now we're starting to look at different influences, pendant watches, pocket watches, but also the idea that an articulated lug might be better ergonomically. So this is the beginning of an articulated lug in de Bethune watchmaking. Of course, this DBS with black dial and platinum case is one of only 6 made. It's a really cool watch because it also looks forward to and anticipates the DB28, where you have the barrel bridge, the power sources, the escapement, the balance bridge, and then a moon phase on the dial side. So this is a really interesting watch in its own right. And by the way, this watch, one of only 6 made like this, a very special piece, 6-day Power Reserve. You could see on the reverse side, we've got the Power Reserve indicator, and then that spherical moon phase on the front with a very early version of the triple parachute shock protection. But it was the DB26 of 2008 that gave us what would come to be known as de Bethune's distinctive house style, the floating lugs. This is a patented design, the idea being with a little bit of give and some in and out extension and compression, you create a watch that was an ergonomic dream while at the same time being fairly large, allowing a platform for a big movement with a lot of power reserve, but also complications. And so what we're actually looking at here, yes, it is right side up. It is an inverse bullhead winder. By the way, as you see it right here, only 4 were made in this style with a combination of metals, tones, and textures, but it's a perpetual calendar, and it also marked the first use of de Bethune's sapphire hands, which actually have a metal cap that runs around the outside. So that's not just some sort of metallized deposit on the glass, that's actually a little fired blue frame that snaps onto the edge of the hand. So a really cool look in a perpetual calendar, and once again, you can see we've got sort of early versions of some of these de Bethune signatures, such as the 2007 patent balance, which is platinum and titanium, non-annular, it's like a yoke, and then again an early version of triple parachute shock protection. And you can see this one's sort of designed to be viewed upside down because this is right side up. So you could see that even the text on the movement is upside down or right side up, depending on your perspective. But it was in 2006, with the arrival of the DB20 GMT, that Denis Flageolet, who had previously explored a couple of classical and avant-garde concepts alternately with the DBS and the DB1 series, Denny went in a direction that had nothing to do with the prior watches and would have nothing to do with subsequent watches. So we talked about how, as of 2008, de Bethune was now moving in the direction of what would eventually become the signature DB28, and that's exactly what I've got right here. The DB20 series, from the DB20 up to 24, these were very different kinds of watches. So let's take a quick look at a 22 that is in white gold. Now, what's interesting here is now we have this broad shingle-like form, and I'll admit that there is some confusion about how big this watch is. As de Bethune reports it as 48, we have it listed on our website as 45. I think we're trying to express how it wears. It is a 48. If you measure across the bezel, either way, it is a 48. But it's also only 11.4 millimeters thick and 52.4 lug-to-lug with a 26 millimeter spacing between the lugs. So although it is an awesomely sized shingle, it also wears really well on a smaller wrist, being thin and not too broad. So my wrist is only 16 centimeters. Don't be afraid of the stated size of this watch. It's a really great fit. And when I talk about it having nothing in common with later or prior de Bethune watches, look at that. No ogival lug tips, no cabochon lugs, and no open dial with balance and moon phase and barrel bridge. If you want a conventional dial, you want something that's not quite as classical as a DB1 through 15, but you also don't want something along the lines of a DB28. This is a great direction. There's another feature of these that's worth mentioning. Initially, they were water resistant to 100 meters, and that increased by hundreds of meters subsequently. So with their screw-down crowns, these became the first true de Bethune sports watches, being hundreds of meters water resistant and automatic. They were designed to serve as a more rugged platform at a time back in the mid to late 2000s when watches like the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore were really pointing in a direction that indicated there was a bigger market for an horlogerie sports watch, and this went above and beyond what Audemars Piguet had to offer. So I should mention now that every version of the DB22 ever made amounts to 170 pieces, and there were 9 individual variants. So it is a very partitioned production. Very few overall, and many variants within, meaning that for any given variant, there's only a handful that are identical to it in the world. So here we have white gold and a combination of finishes. Note the use of media blast both on the flanks and the bezel in combination with polish and very sharp angular stepped lugs. When you get to the dial, you could see the different layers of the dial and the use of microlight engraving, a reductive lathe-based guilloche that was very different from the classicism of the early watches. So here we've got the rosette, but then here we have this very fine concentric pattern on a fired blue grade 5 titanium dial. The hands are made of steel, polished and fired. And then you can see outboard, we have almost like a sector style for reading the minutes. A power reserve up at the top of the dial. And now I'm going to bring in my rose gold variant here, which I think is the one you buy if you're in Miami. Chicago, London, New York, this is your DB22. Whereas the Riviera, Singapore, LA, Miami, this is your DB22. Now, dimensionally, it's exactly the same. You can see the unusual aesthetic of the Media Blast Rose Gold. It has a slightly lighter tone of blue on the dial, and that was tailored to match the red gold. When you turn these over, by the way, let me show you how the Power Reserve works. It's still a 6-day Power Reserve. It transitions from red to black as it is energized. You can wind it manually, but it also features a pawl-based automatic winding system. This is de Bethune's DB2024 movement. So a couple of interesting things here. First, yes, it's a highly water-resistant case, but it's also a very shock-resistant watch. This distinctive form of triple parachute where you have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs, this is reserved for the automatic watches. And Denis realized when he created this that if you're going to have a highly shock-resistant balance, you need a highly shock-resistant rotor on a sports watch. So we have a premium precious metal mass outboard and then a very long lever arm in titanium. So this is going to rotate because it's got a high polar moment or turning force, but you don't want it to torque in ways that flex the bearing at center. So to prevent it from moving diagonally or side to side and only rotating, Denis patented this system of 4 cantilever springs, and each one has jewels inside it for when the rotor comes in contact with the spring to reduce friction. So you wind up with a super shock-resistant winding system and balance. You can see this is the 2007 patent balance that features the combination of platinum bulbs and the blued titanium yoke. There's also a hairspring in there that is a hairspring cut into 2 pieces, shaped independently and then clamped back together so that they would breathe concentrically like an overcoil, but with the shock resistance and the flat profile of a flat hairspring. And I'll show you a wrist shot of this because I know you're wondering. Dimensions are the same as the white gold model. We also have it in titanium, but with a little wrinkle you're about to see in a moment. It's a really cool watch, and it's the rare de Bethune that you can take swimming. So I often say that these middle de Bethunes with the shingle-like form are probably the most versatile, strictly speaking, because the later DB28s, 27s, and 25s are not designed for swimming. So Denis came up with an idea for an even more rugged sports watch. So he took everything that was special about the 2022 and he added a wrinkle. Now this is one variant of the 24. The 24 is still a Power Reserve, still a twin barrel automatic 6-day Power Reserve, but now you could see we have this unique bezel fixed by bolts and media blasted while also fired a matte blue. It gives the watch a two-tone aesthetic without actually going two-tone in material. All this is grade 5 titanium. We still have the screw-down crown. We still have the extraordinary water resistance. We now have a dial with fired and polished steel hands, but also with an alternately satinated and media blasted titanium base that's been sectored, almost like a star pattern. You could still see the depth of the dial, and this is where de Bethune really steps into its own as a maker of case, dial, and movement with these middle de Bethune watches, the early DB20 series. It's on the back where things get crazy. Now, you saw the rotor, you saw the shock protection, the balance, triple parachute. That's not what I want to highlight here. What I want to highlight is that this was the first watch that gave the user, not the watchmaker, but the user, the ability to individually tailor the effectiveness of the winding system. So if you are a super active person, to avoid wearing down the winding system, you could set the winding vigor, if you will, the winding energy, the efficiency and speed of the winding system to low. If you are sometimes active, but also you have quiet moments, then you can set this so that it will be equal to a happy medium. But if you're very sedentary like me, what you're going to want to do is set it for maximum winding efficiency so that it will energize itself with the slightest motions. Now, if you look very careful, you can see the pawl-based winding system peeking out in the corner. It's a little bit easier to see, I think, on the 22s. Here you can see it more easily. It's a very efficient winding system, but you can tailor the outcome with the crown. Now, Richard Mille, of course, hangs its hat on its variable inertia rotor, but that can only be adjusted by a watchmaker. You don't get to choose as the owner of the watch. Here, it is entirely within your reach. The mechanism is unique and patented, and you can see that even the intricate pieces of this mechanism have been micro-decorated. It is an incredibly clever and durable mechanism. Now, every version ever made of the DB24 amounts to 94 pieces. This is my favorite version with the titanium case and the blued bezel. And once again, although it is a 48 on paper, look how easily this wears on my wrist. Comfortable, flat, it will fit under a cuff. Now, if you look down the barrel, you can see that the lugs are out to the edge of my wrist. But this is a big watch designed for legibility, durability, water resistance. It is something you're supposed to read at a glance. It is purposefully large, and it's a sort of case study in where Denis Flageolet's design direction was in the mid-2000s, from 2006 to 2007, as these early DB20 series rolled out. Now, we know later on the look of the floating lug on the DB28 and the 27 would become commonly associated with the brand, and for those who are more conservative, there's the round case, solid dial, and fixed lugs of the DB24 series. But for me, these are the most interesting de Bethune watches because this is where Denis really departed from his career arc. These are hard watches to characterize, just like those middle Frank Lloyd Wrights built out on the West Coast. They were like nothing he did in the Midwest, nothing he did in the East, nothing he did internationally. He was in the West and he was influenced by the history of the West, and those were individual statements. Nothing about before, nothing about where he would go, but a moment in time, a time capsule of the master's craft. And that's exactly what you get with these early DB20s. For me, they are the best value in contemporary de Bethune, and also technically among the most interesting, since they are very water resistant and very shock resistant. Also very rare. 94 of these of every description in the world. FP Journe will make up to 110 chronomètres bleus per year. So again, just relative availability and rarity. These are few and far between. So reach out to Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase and pricing details, and reach out to me directly with the questions you have about these, because a lot of folks, if you were to cover up the name, would not recognize them for what they are. And I think that's kind of part of the fun. Whenever someone asks, you get to be the curator of this model's story, of this series story, and you get to pass it on. Again, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase, pricing, and questions.